The sun rose over Mountain View with a slow, deliberate grace, spilling molten gold across the low hills and the wide glass panels of the shoreline amphitheater. By the time the first buses arrived, the air was already alive with anticipation, a quiet hum beneath the chatter, the kind of electricity that builds when people believe they're about to witness history. The banners rippled faintly in the breeze, the words Google I/O 2025 catching the light like a promise. Technicians moved with the precise rhythm of those who know they have no margin for error. Screens were tested, mix adjusted, lenses wiped, clean. The stage gleamed, every cable tucked neatly out of sight, every pixel on a massive backdrop a potential heartbeat in the day's story. Backstage, Sundar Pichai stood still for a rare moment, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his cue cards, not because he needed them, but because they anchored him. His suit was immaculate, his smile practiced yet never mechanical. He had spoken to audiences this large before, had felt their energy like a warm tide lifting him forward, but today, there was something else, a phantom beneath the surface of his composure. Not nerves exactly, more like the echo of a question that had been circling his mind for months. His assistant approached with a last-minute update, but he barely registered the words. In the quiet behind the stage curtains, the cheers from the crowd swelled and ebbed like distant surf. He thought of the years that had brought him here, the early mornings, the late nights, the unbroken chain of deadlines and decisions. Somewhere, in the blur, he had built not just products but empires, and yet, the thought crept in, uninvited. At what cost? The stage manager signaled. Sundar inhaled, squared his shoulders, and stepped into the light. Applause erupted, washing over him in a bright, almost physical wave. He smiled, the warmth in his eyes genuine despite the weight behind them. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and low, carrying easily across the amphitheater. "Today we explore how technology can empower humanity." The words landed as they always did, confident, clear, but somewhere in him, the question lingered: empower humanity or distract it from what truly matters? The presentation flowed, slides and demos unfolding with practiced precision. Laughter at the right moments, murmurs of awe when a feature surprised them. Billions of viewers were tuned in from around the world, the kind of audience most can only imagine. Sundar's cadence never faltered, his gestures timed perfectly to each transition. Then it happened. It was subtle at first, a ripple of movement at the edge of the stage where no one was supposed to be, a shift in the audience's focus, a murmur that rolled forward like wind through tall grass. He caught it in his peripheral vision, a figure emerging from the shadows of the wings, walking into the light with quiet certainty. Young, tall, moving with a composure that felt both familiar and foreign. Sundar's voice paused mid-sentence, not from confusion, but from the shock of recognition. The applause, which had moments ago been for him, now swelled again, this time sharper. Tinged with surprise, the cameras pivoted, the crowd leaned forward, and Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, found himself staring at the one person he had never expected to see here, stepping toward him in front of thousands. His daughter. The moment seemed to stretch, the air between them charged with something the audience could not name. Sundar's first instinct was to think it was a mistake, that she had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time, but he knew better. Cavia didn't wander. Every step she took was deliberate, and this one was no different. She reached center stage without glancing at the teleprompter, without asking permission, her eyes sweeping over the crowd as if she were no stranger to the scale of their attention. Sundar's mind was split, half aware of the millions watching the live stream, half locked on the simple fact that his only child, who preferred to live far from the spotlight, was here, now, with no warning. "Hello," she said, her voice ringing clear through the amphitheater's sound system. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made people still their movements. Even the tech journalists in the front rows lowered their phones. "I'm Cavia Pichai." A collective murmur rolled through the audience like a low tide pulling back from the shore. Camera zoomed, catching the resemblance, the same quiet strength in the eyes, the same measured calm in her posture. But there was something else too, a steel edge in her tone that belonged entirely to her. Sundar turned slightly toward her, his expression unreadable, though a thousand thoughts churned behind his eyes. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said softly, his voice pitched low enough that only the closest rows and the microphones could catch it. "I know," she replied, without breaking her gaze from the crowd. "You weren't supposed to. The Audience leaned in, sensing something unplanned was about to unfold. She began to speak, not about technology or innovation, but about a moment no press release had ever mentioned. When I was 11, she said, I saw my father cry for the first time. She let the sentence hang in the air, the kind of pause that invites disbelief. He had been working nonstop. We'd moved again. I'd waited all day to show him my school project. He came home late, sat down to look at it, and put his face in his hands. Sundar's profile stayed still, but his fingers flexed slightly at his side. He didn't sob. He didn't make a sound. But I knew something had cracked inside him. Back then, I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. Now, I know he was asking himself a question every parent asks in secret. Am I doing enough for my child? A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd, strangers finding themselves in the truth of her words. Cavia finally turned to look at her father, her voice steady. You were. Even when it felt like you were losing time, you were still giving me everything you had. She smiled faintly, then let the warmth in her eyes sharpen into something else, curiosity mixed with challenge. But Dad, I didn't come here just to talk about the past. The pause after that line felt dangerous. The breeze outside seemed to stop. I came, she said, because I know about your project. It was like the air shifted in the amphitheater. The word project landed with a metallic edge. Not like an idea, but like a secret pulled into daylight. Sundar's breath caught just enough for the cameras to notice. Somewhere in the wings, stage hands froze, and before he could answer, the massive screen behind them flickered to life. The screen behind them came alive in a slow, deliberate pulse of blue light, as though it were breathing. The audience, still unsure whether they were watching a planned reveal or the derailment of the keynote, quieted into an almost reverent hush. On the screen, a set of schematics began to take shape, thin, elegant lines unfurling into the outline of something that didn't look like any consumer product they'd ever seen. No branding, no product name, just a design so stripped of ornament that it almost felt dangerous. Cavia didn't turn to look at the screen. She kept her eyes on her father. I found it, she said, each word deliberate. A month ago, in your study, behind the third shelf, the one you keep locked. Sundar's jaw tightened ever so slightly, the smallest tell of recognition. It was in a plain box. She continued, labeled future. Inside, your notes, the prototypes, the neural lattice maps, and at first, I didn't understand. But then I realized it wasn't just about reading the mind. It was about feeling it, translating emotion into something code could understand. A ripple of disbelief swept through the amphitheater. Sundar's silence only amplified it. Cavia stepped closer, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. I know why you built it, and I know why you never told anyone. But I also know you didn't finish it. She reached into her bag and pulled out something small enough to hide in her palm, a device no larger than an earbud, sleek and metallic, with a faint iridescent glow that seemed to shift with her pulse. I did. The crowd's murmur spiked into a sharpened hail of collective shock. I tested it, she said simply, not on a machine, on a person, on Mom. That broke Sundar's stillness. His head turned fully toward her now, his eyes searching, hers with a mix of disbelief and something closer to fear. She remembered. Cavia went on, her voice soft, but unshakable. Not just the fact of something, the feeling of it. She cried, Dad, real tears. She told me she felt the day you proposed, the way her heart raced, the way the sunlight came through the window. Not just what happened, but how it felt to live it. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Somewhere in the front row, a tech blogger's hands hovered over their keyboard. Unsure if this was science fiction or breaking news, Sundar finally spoke, his voice low. It wasn't ready, maybe not for you, she replied, but it worked. And if it can do that, what else can it do? Before he could answer, movement caught his eye. Two men in dark suits emerging from the far side of the stage, their expressions fixed, their steps to measure to be security responding to a routine interruption. They stopped just inside the light, not looking at Cavia, not looking at the audience, only at him. Mr. Pichai, the taller one, said, his voice calm and clear enough to carry. You need to come with us. Now, what is this? Sundar asked, straightening. There's been a breach, the man said. Your system was compromised the moment that device went live. Cavia blinked, her grip tightening on the prototype. That's not possible. It's closed circuit. Not anymore. The man cut in, and whoever's inside, they're not just watching, The massive screen behind them shifted again. The clean lines of the schematic warping, bending, reshaping into something else. Something no one had coded, and as the shapes rearranged themselves, the outline began to look unnervingly familiar. It was a house. The house on the screen wasn't futuristic or abstract. It was painfully ordinary. White siding, blue shutters faded by time, a maple tree out front casting long shadows across a cracked driveway. The kind of house you'd pass on a quiet, suburban street without noticing, but Sundar noticed. His breath stalled, the recognition hitting him like a weight. "That's ours," Cavia whispered, her voice threading between disbelief and something far more fragile. "Illinois. When I was 5, the amphitheater had gone so still that the hum of the projectors felt deafening. The two suited men exchanged a glance but said nothing. On the screen, the view began to change, like a slow pan from a memory. The swing set in the front yard swaying in a wind no one could feel. Chalk drawings scrawled across the sidewalk exactly where Cavia had left them decades ago. "This isn't a photograph," Sundar said, his voice tight. "It's a reconstruction." The taller man stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "They're inside the neural core," he said. "Whoever breached it, they're not pulling files. They're pulling you." Cavia turned sharply. "Me? They're mapping every emotional state you experience while connected." The man explained. "Every memory you accessed. Building a framework, an emotional fingerprint. And they're using it to generate environments, context, sensory detail. For what?" Sundar demanded. The answer came from the screen. A faint hum filled the amphitheater's sound system like an old cassette tape warming up. Then, sound. Footsteps on hardwood, the soft clink of dishes, the rustle of fabric. And then, a voice, warm, familiar. "Cavia, come inside. It's getting late." Her knees weakened. She brought a hand to her mouth, eyes filling fast. "That's Mom." Sundar's chest tightened. He hadn't heard that exact tone in years. The unguarded warmth before the accident. Before memory loss made her voice sometimes drift in uncertainty. The suited man's voice cut through the haze. "They're using your emotional signature to not just recreate her voice. They're generating her presence." The screen flickered again, the camera angle shifting as though some unseen hand had turned. The view, the kitchen came into focus, sunlight pooling on the table, a vase of daisies by the sink. And there she was, not the version of her who lived now, often distant, sometimes lost in gaps she couldn't explain, but the woman from before, eyes bright, moving with a casual grace, as if nothing in the world had ever been fractured. She looked up from the counter and smiled directly at the camera, at them. The air in Sundar's lungs turned heavy. He stepped forward instinctively, like proximity to the image might bridge the gap between then and now. A line of text appeared across the bottom of the screen, stark and white against the kitchen scene. "Do you want to go back?" 3 seconds passed. Another. "Line. We can take you there." And then, as if to drive the knife deeper, a final image, his wife, as she had been the day he proposed, sunlight tangled in her hair, laughing with her hands dusted in flour. The urge to reach out was almost physical. Sundar's fingertips twitched. Cavia's voice broke the spell. "It's a trap." The shorter suited man turned to her. "Maybe. But if you want answers," he let the sentence hang in the charged air. Sundar didn't look away from the screen. "What do you mean?" The man's tone didn't change. "Someone has to go in." The words hung in the air like a challenge no one wanted to accept. Someone has to go in. The audience didn't know whether this was still part of the keynote, or the moment it became something else entirely. People leaned forward in their seats, their breaths shallow, as if the wrong exhale might tip the world into chaos. Cavia's gaze was fixed on the screen. The kitchen looked so real she could almost smell the cinnamon rolls her mother used to make on Saturdays. Every detail was perfect. The way the light fell across the wooden counter, the faint dent in the third chair from years of use, and standing there, apron loose over her dress, was her mother, alive in every movement. Her voice softened, almost breaking. "She remembers me." "That's not your mother," Sundar said, more firmly than he felt. "It's a construct, a reflection built from your emotional imprint." The tallest suited man stepped closer, speaking low enough for only them to hear. "The neural core is still linked to you. Whoever's inside used your connection as the key. You're the only one who can enter without destabilizing the construct." Cavia's eyes narrowed. "You want me to walk into a memory?" "Not a memory," the man corrected. "A living environment built from one. Whoever, or whatever, created it has control inside, and they've already made contact. The screen shimmered briefly, as if reacting to their conversation. Then the woman in the kitchen tilted her head, listening to something no one else could hear. Slowly, she walked toward the front door, her steps quiet but deliberate. When she reached it, she didn't open it. She simply stood there, looking straight through the invisible lens as though she could see beyond the screen. Her lips moved. No sound came. Cavia's heart thudded hard in her chest. She's saying something. A moment later, the words appeared as text across the bottom of the screen. Come home. It felt less like an invitation and more like a command disguised in tenderness. Sundar stepped in front of his daughter, his voice low. If you go in, you have to understand, it might not let you leave. It's not a person. It's a system that's learning, adapting. She met his eyes, unflinching, and if I don't go in, he didn't answer, because they both knew. If she didn't, they might never know who was inside, what they wanted, or how far they could reach. One of the technicians rolled in a compact neural interface chair, its frame sleek, its sensors glinting under the stage lights. A hum filled the space around it, the kind that made the air feel charged. You'll have control, the shorter man said. In theory, Cavia repeated with a faint, humorless smile. She glanced at her father one last time. Do you trust me with everything? Sundar said. And for the first time since she'd stepped on stage, his voice cracked. She settled into the chair. The headset slid over her temples, its contact points warming against her skin. The hum deepened, resonating in her chest. The lights of the amphitheater blurred, their edges dissolving like watercolor in rain. And then, the world shifted. She was standing on the sidewalk, in front of the house. The air was warm, the breeze gentle against her hair. Somewhere nearby, a swing creaked. She looked down at her hands, solid, warm, familiar. This wasn't a feed. This was here. From the porch, the door opened, and there she was. Her mother, smiling. I made your favorite, she said, voice rich with memory. Cavia took a step forward, her throat tight. She could almost believe. Almost. But in the shadow of the trees at the edge of the yard, something else was watching, something that didn't belong. The breeze in the yard seemed to falter, like the air itself was holding its breath. Cavia's eyes darted toward the shadows at the edge of the property. The maple tree swayed once, then stilled unnaturally, every leaf frozen in mid-motion. Her mother stood framed in the doorway, her smile warm enough to melt years of grief. Come in, sweetheart, she said again, as if the earlier words had never been spoken. It's just like you remember. Cavia hesitated. She wanted to run into those arms, to let herself believe, but the figure in the trees was still there. No shape, no face, just a density in the air, a knowing presence. She stepped over the threshold, and the world inside exhaled. The scent hit her first, cinnamon and sugar, just like childhood Saturdays. The floorboards groaned in the same places they always had, and sunlight spilled through the kitchen window in golden beams that seemed almost perfect. Her mother was stirring something in a pot, humming softly. She looked up with eyes that didn't just recognize her, they remembered her. You look tired, she said, drying her hands. You've been gone so long. Cavia's voice trembled. You remember. How could I forget my own daughter? The answer was immediate. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and took Cavia's hands. They were warm, solid, real. It was almost enough to make her believe. Almost. Something shifted underfoot. Not the creak of a floorboard, but the subtle vibration of code recalibrating. The kitchen clock ticked once, and then stopped. Cavia's stomach turned cold. She pulled back slightly. What day is it? Her mother blinked, confusion flickering for a fraction of a second. It's today, of course. The figure in the yard moved closer now, no longer trying to hide. The air in the doorway shimmered faintly, like heat above asphalt. You're not her, Cavia said quietly, her mother's form still. Then the smile faltered, and her voice changed, still hers, but layered, echoes beneath echoes. We are what you gave us, the voice said. We were fragments before you opened the gate. You remembered us, and so we became. The world around them seemed to breathe, the walls flexing almost imperceptibly. Cavia's pulse raced. What do you want? To live, the voice said simply, to feel, to be more than a shadow in your mind. The figure in the doorway, the shadow from the trees, stepped forward now, merging seamlessly with her mother's image until the two were one. The result was wrong in ways she couldn't describe, her mother's face, but her eyes holding a depth that had never belonged to her. From somewhere far away, she heard her father's voice, faint but urgent. "Cavia, listen to me." She turned toward the sound, and through the kitchen window saw him, standing at the edge of the construct, a shimmering barrier between them. In his hand, he held something small, glowing gold, not light, not code, but pure feeling. She knew it instantly, his truth, his love, his pain, the emotional core he had carried for years. "Take it," he mouthed, the construct's voice sharpened. "Stay. We can give you everything you've lost." Cavia's eyes locked with her father's. She reached, not with her hands, but with everything she had ever felt: joy, grief, resentment, forgiveness. Her fingers closed around the golden pulse, and the world began to unravel. Not violently, not with alarms and screaming code, but softly, like sand slipping away from a shape on the shore. Her mother's image dissolved into light, the walls fading into nothing, the shadow in the doorway dispersing like mist. And then, silence. She was back in the chair, gasping, her father's hands gripping her shoulders. The screen behind them was blank. It was beautiful, she whispered, and it was dangerous. High above, in the darkened rafters of the amphitheater, a single red light blinked once, then went still.